Ivan's real ambition lay beyond the borders. He turned his eyes to the east. In 1552, he captured Kazan, and 4 years later Astrakhan. These conquests not only expanded Russia, but turned it into a multi-religious empire. Now the gates of Siberia were wide open, but everything suddenly turned upside down. In 1560, his beloved wife Anastasia suddenly died. A wave of suspicion spread through the palace. Could she have been poisoned by the nobility? When his closest allies also began dying one by one, Ivan's mind sank into darkness. He now saw enemies in every corner. In 1564, he made a decision that would change the course of history forever. So what happened next? Leaving Moscow with only a few personal belongings, he abandoned the city completely. When Ivan left the throne behind, accusing the nobles of betrayal, everyone was shocked. Was this a surrender? On the contrary, it was a risky but carefully calculated political move. Without answering to anyone, he could declare anyone a traitor and punish them. In other words, he wanted absolute power. And he got it. So what did this unlimited authority lead to? Russia was divided into directly controlled territories. Ivan created a special unit of agents dressed in black clothes and carrying terrifying symbols. The group called the Oprichniki was tasked with finding and eliminating traitors. A true era of terror was beginning. Noble families were slaughtered, and their lands were confiscated. Suspicion became the most powerful weapon. This atmosphere of fear eventually targeted an entire city. In 1570, Ivan launched a major attack on the city of Novgorod. For 5 weeks, thousands of people were tortured and the city was completely looted. But the greatest blow would come with his own hands, against his own family. In 1581, during a rage attack, he struck his heir, his son Ivan Ivanovich. The blows he inflicted on his own son were fatal. Destroying his own bloodline with his own hands drove him into deep collapse. 3 years after this tragedy, Ivan died, leaving behind a country shaken by wars and economic crisis. Yet despite all this destruction, one reality remained unchanged. Ivan had transformed Russia from a small medieval state into a vast empire spanning 2 continents. He took the first step that led Russia to the enormous borders it is known for today. He established autocratic rule and also opened the gates of Siberia wide. So what kind of man was this ruler? According to historians, he was both deeply religious and incredibly cruel. His intellect shone, but his mind was equally unstable. While trying to modernize the country, he actually isolated it from the world. He shattered the social structure and laid the foundations for Russia's endless traumatic transformations. When the great ruler left the stage, Fyodor I succeeded him. However, there was a serious problem. Fyodor was both physically weak and mentally limited. As a result, real power quickly passed into someone else's hands. His brother-in-law, the noble Boris Godunov, began ruling the country as regent. Godunov actually knew his job well. He cleaned up the heavy mess left from Ivan's final years, secured the southern borders, and improved relations with neighbors. Just when things were getting back on track, a spiritual move came in 1589. Godunov made the Russian church independent, raising its status to the highest level. Russia was now no longer spiritually dependent on Constantinople and was equal to other churches. But suddenly, a dark shadow fell over these successes. In 1591, Ivan's youngest son Dmitry died under mysterious circumstances. It was claimed that the 9-year-old child accidentally fell onto a knife and died. But the people never believed it. Moreover, according to church rules, Dmitry's claim to the throne was highly disputed. This uncertainty triggered the great storm that led Russia into the time of troubles and eventually the rise of the Romanov dynasty. The death of Ivan's son Dmitry marked the end of an era. According to official records, it was an accident. The child had tragically fallen onto a knife. But was it really that simple? Witnesses of the time claimed Boris Godunov was behind it. In this atmosphere of uncertainty, Tsar Fyodor died in 1598, leaving no heir brought an end to the 700-year-old Rurik dynasty. A council was held and Boris Godunov was elected as the new leader. However, no matter how capable he was, he could never erase the suspicion in people's minds. And the greatest test had not even begun yet. In 1601, freezing cold destroyed the entire harvest. A great famine lasting 3 years began. In some regions, 2/3 of the population died of starvation. How did people interpret this disaster? To them, it was not coincidence. It was divine punishment for Boris's alleged crime. It was 1604. A man appeared in Polish lands, making a shocking claim, "I am the Tsarevich Dmitri, thought to be dead." Historians would later call him the false Dmitri. But at that moment, his claim was enough to change Russia's destiny. Backed by Polish nobles, he marched toward the border with a large army. So how would Russia respond? At first, the Tsar's forces managed to stop his advance. But in April 1605, everything suddenly changed. Boris died unexpectedly. This sudden death also marked the end of Russian resistance. Dmitri entered Moscow like a victorious commander and was proclaimed Tsar. Boris's family was quickly eliminated by rivals. The new Tsar was intelligent and energetic, but soon he began making mistakes that would lead to his downfall. He filled the palace with Polish advisors, married a Catholic noblewoman, and ignored Orthodox traditions that were sensitive to the people. This alienated even his strongest supporters. Disaster was approaching. In May 1606, less than a year after his coronation, the palace was stormed. Led by Vasily Shuisky, conspirators overthrew Dmitri. His end was a lesson in itself. His body was burned, his ashes placed inside a cannon, and fired toward Poland, the direction from which he had come. But this death brought no peace. On the contrary, everything was only just beginning. Shuisky ascended the throne, but his authority was very weak. Soon another false Dmitri appeared on the stage. The country was thrown into total chaos. On one side was Shuisky, on the other the fake prince. Meanwhile, Poland, Sweden, and the Cossacks were all trying to take advantage of the chaos. Russia was now in a full state of collapse. How did this dark picture change? In 1613, a council was convened and the young Mikhail Romanov was chosen as the new Tsar. This decision marked the beginning of a dynasty that would rule Russia for 300 years. The new government quickly restored order. Although some territories were lost, peace was made with neighbors and the great period of chaos finally ended. Looting and uprisings subsided. Russia was rising again, but the state was left with one question: how could this chaos be prevented from happening again? The answer was to place all segments of society under strict control. The nobility became almost like state officials. For the peasants, the situation was far harsher. They were bound to their land and could not move without permission. This pressure created the serfdom system, turning millions into property-like dependents. The state gained stability, but at the cost of deep social division. So how did this rigid order affect politics? When Tsar Mikhail Romanov came to power, a representative assembly of the people was still being convened. At first glance, it seemed like a participatory system. But once the crises passed and things calmed down, the power of the assembly declined. By the end of the 17th century, the Tsar's absolute power re-emerged. While political pressure continued, the country was also physically expanding. Cities were rebuilt and trade revived. The Russians advanced relentlessly eastward into vast, endless territories. By the mid-17th century, they had already reached the shores of the Pacific Ocean. Russia was becoming one of Europe's great powers. And right at this point, a name emerged that would change the course of history: 10-year-old Peter Alexeyevich Romanov. After the death of his half-brother Fyodor III, he found himself in the middle of a dangerous power struggle. Peter was declared Tsar alongside his other half-brother Ivan V. Their sister Sophia acted as regent. On the surface, order seemed established, but deep down, this alliance only masked a major conflict. It was May 1682. The Streltsy, the Moscow garrison troops, launched a major uprising. The Kremlin was stormed. The young Peter witnessed the killing of his closest relatives and allies. How does such horror shape a child? This trauma fundamentally changed Peter's view of Russia's old order. When things settled, the situation had changed. Sophia took control, and Peter was sent with his mother to a village near Moscow. But he would not spend his time grieving in palace corridors. Instead, he directed his energy into the streets. He formed toy regiments with his friends. Who could have known that these childhood games would become the future elite military units? Peter's curiosity went far beyond warfare. He worked as a carpenter, learned printing, and even pulled teeth. But the moment that truly changed his life was finding an old English boat in a warehouse. From that moment, an endless passion for the sea began. By 1689, nothing would ever be the same again. At 17, Peter, with the support of his guards, overthrew his sister. With the death of his co-ruler Ivan V in 1696, he became the sole ruler. But he was far from a typical ruler. Instead of focusing on state affairs, he spent time in foreign quarters with European experts. He expanded his vision through a major European journey in 1697. He traveled under the name Peter Mikhailov to hide his identity, but at over 2 meters tall, he was impossible to conceal. In Holland, he personally learned shipbuilding and exchanged ideas with scientists. Now a new era for Russia was beginning. Peter's mind was in Europe. He wanted to bring not only technology but also lifestyle to Russia. He gathered hundreds of foreign experts around him, but upon returning to Moscow, a major problem awaited him: the Streltsy Rebellion. The rebellion was crushed, but Peter's anger did not fade. He completely dismantled the unit, seeing them as a symbol of the old Russia he wanted to erase. This was only the first step of his radical transformation. The transformation began harshly. He ordered nobles to shave their beards and made European-style clothing mandatory. Those who resisted were heavily taxed. The calendar was changed, and young people were sent abroad for education. So was this enough? The real turning point came in 1703. On the swampy banks of the Neva River, a new capital began to rise. St. Petersburg. Thousands of peasants died during this harsh construction, but within just 10 years, a modern city emerged. A city with palaces resembling Amsterdam and wide boulevards was formed. Peter was not planning to stop. He completely transformed the state structure. He established a senate and specialized ministries. Now even an ordinary citizen could rise through merit. The first newspaper was printed, and scientific academies were founded. Only one obstacle remained: the church. Peter could not appoint a successor to Patriarch Adrian, who died in 1700. He left the position vacant for 20 years and eventually abolished it completely. The church was now under state control. Russia was no longer the same old Russia. Peter had a single plan in mind: to turn Russia into a massive military power. So where did he begin? First, he built a navy from scratch.